Is that a Block Island chart behind you?
I assume that's directed to me, Keith. It is
Yes,
not.
yes, it is not.
No.
What's that?
I think I live in climate, and I think I say that every time I come to town inside. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Hey, Barbara. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I know this meeting occurred on short notice. Call the meeting to order. Today is Friday, May 3rd, 2024. Is 4 p.m. on the nose. I want to wait for Mary Ann to come in before I. Oh, here she comes. Mary Ann and Amy are going to take us through the developments of the last few days. I guess we'll, in all likelihood, have a conversation about implications, et cetera. One of the things that I've struggled to get through my thick skull is the budget is now before the financial town meeting. You know, we can't, for example, amend the warrant or, you know, there's not really much in the way of, or anything in the way of action that we can take. So I think when we scheduled this meeting, one of the things we were, the primary objective was to educate the council and the community on the developments, presumably have a bit of conversation about it. And then we'll all be sort of equally up to speed / up to date on where, you know, sort of where we are going to be at the beginning of the financial town meeting on Monday. So Mary Ann, do you want to start?
I'll start. And Amy can jump in. And I think Nick and James are joining us because we've included them in the dialogue and updated them. So I think as I forward to the council that we did receive notification from Department of Revenue that they didn't approve our override as it relates to critical public safety, climate resiliency, and growth. They did approve our override for the debt service. So the debt service totaling $695,714 override request was approved by the Department of Revenue. What wasn't approved are other budget items that we spent a lot of time discussing and putting forth. So I'll list what those items are for the council and everyone else. Fire equipment to the amount of 600,000, dispatch security renovations 100,000, communication 80,000, or transfer station uses capacity planning 100,000, Block Island Health Service 14,000, Block Island Fire Rescue 39,500, erosion mitigation shoreline access 60, and Old Harbor Bulkhead 50,000. Amy and I did have a follow-up with the analyst, Keith, I don't know his last name right now, and Steve Coleman, who is the division chief for the Department of Revenue. They were great. They explained it to him. We asked them to explain it to him. And basically what they said, and they have to work in a very defined parameters. Specifically, we have to show substantial growth in the tax levy. And that's the language that is in the state statute. It specifically says the city or town experienced substantial growth in its tax base as results of major new construction,
So in the tax base, not the tax levy.
Correct, the tax base. So we discussed that with, and explained to them some of the growth we're seeing here on the island. However, when they look at our tax base, the numbers weren't there, even though we explained to them, even though we talked about the building permits. One thing they did say to us, that our application is one of the best they've seen, but that didn't help us.
So when you say tax base, that would be adding new properties that were previously untaxed?
Adding new properties in general.
Okay.
So for example, a large commercial development, a large subdivision,
And
Thank you.
which is sort of another square peg moment for Block Island.
And we talked about that. It does talk about new construction that necessitates either significant infrastructure or school housing expenditures by the city or town, or significant increase in the needs of essential municipal service. Such increase in expenditures or demands of services is certified by the Department of Revenue. So when they talk about new construction, they're talking about a major commercial business coming in, or a major subdivision. So that's where we are at this point. As you know, we did warrant, as we discussed during the budget hearings and work session, we did warrant the items as presented with the override, knowing that we would eventually get a decision. Amy, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that than what I went through.
I think you've hit on most of the highlights. Ultimately, that the department will not consider any broader definitions of growth or burden or need. And so ultimately, Block Island will essentially never meet the criteria set forth in those provisions as they're currently written. Neil, I think you asked a clarifying question around the tax base and how that's measured. And we talked in our conversations a lot about construction value and annual construction value and how that's increasing every year, up to $32 million last year for calendar 23. And the math basically breaks down to, even though those numbers are growing for us and we're up to $32 million a year in construction value, most of the tax base on Block Island, as it's measured, is in the land value. So on a total tax base of $2.7 billion, 32 million, even though it's a lot higher than it was previously, just doesn't have that mathematical impact because we have so much value in the land. And at a different time, we can work through math and mechanics, but it was a really illustrative conversation about how they can't deviate from that single metric. So.
They did say to us, because of some of the items that we brought in up in our application, they did consult their legal counsel. So I think they were looking for ways to possibly help us with this or support our override, but it came back down to the state statute and the language in it, and they just couldn't do it.
I have a question. A number of the things that are in this whole box that was negated by the state. If we had put these in under capital bonding issues, what would have happened? Or do we know?
Sure. So that was actually part of our conversation, Mariana, if you don't mind. We talked about how the easy exemption is debt service. And so that if the town wanted to pursue bonding these items in the future, that's an exemption that we would almost certainly qualify for. And we spent a little time discussing how this statute really pushes municipalities in that direction, that the fact that we want to pay for it upfront out of pocket out of our tax levy isn't allowed, but we could borrow for it and pay interest over time.
And that was one of the solutions they mentioned to us.
I'm sure it was. That was why I asked the question.
So,
Yes.
so just so you know,
That just,
especially with the,
I just wanted that really on record. And it's not just the long term and it's not just the interest, it's the bonding cost. I don't know what those are these days, but there is a certain cost to bonding. So basically, I've always felt like since they got rid of the sinking funds with some, I thought, totally bogus rationale, it's all been about paying the bank's interest.
Yep.
Okay.
For the moment, I'll be quiet.
Um, I don't know whether this is the right time, but what the heck? I've thought a lot about this over the last couple of days. Yeah, I thought I was probably covering it. Sorry, Chris. Can you hear? Is that better? Okay. Maybe this will work and I'll actually speak into it. Is that better? I've thought a lot about this over the last couple of days and, this is just where I am personally. We have experienced, including this year, pretty steady, regular reductions in the amount of appropriation, for example, for the school. This year, that was $87,000, I think, reduction. I've been at the Capitol, Mary Ann's been at the Capitol, our lobbyists have been at the Capitol, and it's better, but this to me is the epitome of Block Island is a square peg. Here you have an exemption that as Amy says, we will literally never qualify for it. And yet we have sort of the perfect, in my opinion, democratic process around the budget, where David Lewis and Chris Blaine and Barbara McMullen and Doug Michelle, Jim and Dory go to a financial town meeting and say, this budget makes sense to me, and I am prepared to vote for not only for the budget, but to raise my taxes the amount that it costs to fund those budget priorities that are reflected in that document. So this is not a situation where a city council is saying to the constituents of a particular city or town, guess what, Chris? We've decided that your taxes are going up 10% next year. This is an entirely different budget scenario, and in my opinion, really there ought to be different rules for towns that are governed under an FTM, because it is genuinely one person, one vote. You want to say, come to the financial town meeting and vote no. Come to the financial town meeting and say yes. In this particular case, here we have a piece of fire equipment that we learned. If we learned anything last summer, it is that we need to make constant and ongoing improvements in our equipment infrastructure for fighting potentially catastrophic fires. That if anybody on the islands has learned one thing in the last year, it's that. Because no matter where you go down the line on that story and that event, you realize that literally every step we were lucky. And a system that relies on luck to function is scary. So here we have $600,000 for a new pump. We have $100,000 for a dispatch renovation to harden and protect
the very heart of our public safety system, the dispatchers. We have had for years a situation where anybody and their brother can walk in a door and have at it in the dispatch center. We have funding for emergency communication staff person, which is absolutely vital. If you listen to the budget debate this year, we have one person who's doing heroic work to keep a highly complex bolted together communication system in shape. I could go through every single one of these, and my conclusion, whether it's the responsible conclusion, remains to be seen. My conclusion is I'd like to pass this budget. And if Peter Nerona or Dan McKee want to sue the town of Block Island, town of New Shoreham, and tell us that we can't make these investments that we've decided to make ourselves, then let them say that. And we'll have to respond to that. But I feel very comfortable with what we ended up putting in the warrant and putting before the people of the town of New Shoreham. That's me.
Oh, Michael.
Michael, I'd just like to get some info. Can you tell me, Amy, would you repeat, what was it, 2.6 billion is the value?
That is the value of the tax base, 2.75 billion. Yep.
2.75, and that's for what, 20?
That's 12/21/23 estimated.
12/21/23. And what was it the year before?
2.4. Oh, no, sorry, wrong year. Bear with me. Yep, 2.4.
12/22. And what percentage of the increase of 17.9% apply to the denial?
Was of that 18% increase, 8.4% was related to the exemption amount for growth.
That leaves us in a position, where do we make up the 6.4%?
Yep.
And if we approve the budget and then we face a lawsuit, what's that going to cost? Those are the questions I have to know. Thank you.
Go ahead, Martha.
Okay, there are a couple of things, and I know I've said this at a number of other meetings, but when this cap was initially put in, it was supposed to be coupled with a 50% funding. I think Doug may be the only one who remembers this. It was supposed to be coupled with a 50% funding of education from the state. And the very first year, we were still at 29%. And I don't know what the percent is now, but we were at the bottom and we hardly ever got above that, which is a part of me. This budget increase is really when I first saw it, I thought there's no way in God's green earth we can do this. We went through a lot of the things And I looked at, in particular, what I brought up earlier. I mean, we could, if this doesn't go through this year, it will just come back and it will be bonding, it will be more money. And this is the part that really bothers me, probably the most, that the state has some wacko, so the state has some rationale, and I don't quite understand. I'm making this work. It seems to have become more and more complicated as the years have gone by. And I don't know. I suppose they'll say, if you let you do it. I mean, I say, give us the 50% for the school and we'll be fine. We don't have to worry about anything. You won't have to sue us for anything, and we'll have more than enough money. We won't even ask for all the 50% we should have gotten since 1980, whatever the date was.
So Martha, can I just ask, so the 50% was something the state
Oh, it never,
was like handshake, or was
no,
discussed?
the law in the beginning was the Omnibus Tax Relief and Replacement Act. And it was geared toward, but this is like, we're going back to the 80s. It's not, like 10 people probably remember it. And it was geared toward gearing down the cost of education, because in most, and again, we don't fit in that, because in most towns in Rhode Island, education is, do we have anybody from the school committee? It's tended to be around 60%. And here it's tended to be closer between 30 and 40. And, but that went out the window a very, very, very long time ago. I don't think Amy remembers. I don't think that was part of it, since Amy's been on board and she's been with us for more than 20 years in some capacity in the finance office, if not the director. And so that's just sort of my trying to make the point that we just, I think we're all tired of square peg and round hole, but somebody come up with a better expression.
Thoughts, anybody? Thoughts? Comments, anything?
I mean, my real thought here is that this isn't our budget anymore, that this budget is in the hands of the voters. And so I think the best advice that I could offer would be to attend financial town meeting, and to encourage your friends to attend financial town meeting. If you belong to, if you're part of an organization or a group that's in the budget, you're going to want to attend financial town meeting, because this is a monkey wrench that's been thrown into into what's printed here. And everyone's going to want to be there. It's not our budget. We can talk about it all day long, but the voters are the ones that have the say and the votes.
David, then Renee. Sorry, I missed you, Renee.
People's budget, but the reality is you're still our representatives when the legal battles fight and begin, and you need to work through the problems and the resolutions, not us. We just get to pay the bill at the end.
Right.
But that's not my main consideration when I get up. What are in fact the implications, and this is a lawyer question to be asked, and that's why I guess we got them on the phone. We haven't heard anything from them about the practical implications of defying the state at first glance. And the second question is, what are the practical mechanical impacts on the town, I guess specifically the finance director, of implementing the decision to defy the state? Because we can't allow the town to get into a position that we don't have a flow of funds come January 1 or August 15th in the tax bills. So we should get the necessary approvals. Subsequent to that, are there needed approvals from the Department of Administration after our financial town meeting that can be withheld in order for the finance director to finalize the calculations on the tax rate get appropriate approvals if necessary from the state, and send those bills out. So those are my two questions, at this point. And I think we can't, the taxpayers can't proceed without necessarily having, those kinds of guidance from those individuals. Thank you.
Great. Go ahead, guys. Since it's fresh in their minds, James, Nick, Amy.
Good to see everybody. Not the best circumstances, but nice to see you anyway. First off, regarding the potential legal implications, we don't think, Nick and I spoke with Amy and Marianne earlier, we don't think that this will be taken lightly by the state, by the governor or the attorney general. And if possible, for our own interest and yours, we'd like to avoid the possibility, just because it has far-reaching implications with the tax situation, tax bills, the levy. One thing we discussed regarding the pumper was the option of utilizing or addressing that situation through either a additional financial town meeting at some point later on this year, or as a ballot question for the voters in November. And I think we discussed that the fire department could proceed with their research, purchase, and sale of the pumper while that's going on. I think that's a practical possibility for a solution that would avoid a lot of legal wrangling, which might be unnecessary in the future. So that's just an idea. I'd like to put that out there for discussion.
So to refine that a little bit, James, to Martha's point earlier, we could have a financial town meeting and decide to bond for it. That wouldn't be a problem. Is that what you're saying?
That's our idea, correct?
Keith, can I just clarify too that bonding does not necessarily mean that we're committing to a 10 or a 20-year note?
No, of course, yeah.
That can be a much shorter term financing. It's the same mechanism.
Yeah, once she gets done.
Do we?
It was a second question there. Can you get that answer?
Yeah.
I have a follow-up with you.
Said, do we have anything that is outstanding? It's going to be bonded soon that if we had permission, it could be wrapped into? Because it is a small amount to bond. I recognize that.
We do have a couple other small things. We're probably up to between 2 and 3 million of little incidentals. Some of those would be appropriate for say a 10-year term. It's not. I don't want to commit to any duration at this point, but there are a few other little odds and ends out there. The mechanism of a financial town meeting or a referendum question would also potentially leave room for taking those funds or a portion of those funds from reserves if there are reserve funds available. Again, depending on how much and exactly when the timing is. But on something of this size, we would allow for both paths depending on what the timing is. I'll go back to the big question unless someone wants to follow up on that.
No, go, please.
Okay. I'm going to put my 2 cents on the table, which is I can't, as your finance director, recommend that we proceed and adopt a budget that's not consistent with state law. That does create a lot of logistical issues going forward in terms of keeping our operations stable and funded, and doing the other things that the town needs to do throughout the course of a year. We always knew that this was a possibility. We hoped it wouldn't come to fruition, but mechanically, what we had discussed and why we identified those items so clearly was that if the exemption was not granted, those items would come out of the operating budget. So in the absence of other suggestions or other motions from the floor, that would be my recommendation to the voters on Monday as we consider each line item, that the 6 or 8 items are removed from the departments that they are currently presented in.
Good. Thank you very much, Amy. Chris?
Sure.
Ms. Wayne, we look to the town council for leadership and direction. In about 72 hours, we're gonna have financial town meeting. And I think I have to agree with the finance director that it would be reckless to just turn around and say, we're gonna do it anyway. 8.4% has been denied. I think if you end up in a legal battle, you might lose more than that. And I think the worst thing you could do would be to go into financial town meeting with any confusion about how the process is going to go.
Mhm.
It's going to be confusing enough, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people there that don't know what happens right now. So I would urge the council to listen to the finance director and align yourselves, have a unified front that you can present to the voters at financial town meeting. And not have any gray area or any mystery, or just have it decided now what you're gonna do, because 72 hours is not much time on a weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. What's that? Anybody else? Oh, Renee, thank you.
I just had a question about what Amy touched on, and that is what do we have in unencumbered reserves, and how much, if any, cushion do we have there in order to maintain the right ratios that we need? And I don't need that answer now, but I do think it would be helpful for financial planning.
Sure. Let me share as much information today as we have so that we're all on the same page. At June 30th, 2023, which is the most recent fiscal year end, the town had reserves of 21% of our operating and capital budget. Our current reserve policy calls for a range of between 15 and 20%. So that additional 1% would equal about $36,000 of excess reserves. The reason I talked about potentially the timing of when we may ask a future question, particularly around the pumper, is that if that's a question we were asking in the fall, we will then have the 6/30/24 fund balance numbers. And it is too early for me at this point to project what that number would be. But it's possible that there could be excess reserve capacity available at that point.
Thank you, Amy. Michael?
Possible to postpone the meeting for a week or so, whatever the legal time frame will be, in order for the council to put together some kind of plan and recommendations to the taxpayers so that they understand that we violated this by 8.4%. And these are the alternatives, and this is what we could recommend. Because I think to go in blind and just approve it is going to be a much bigger issue for the state. Thank you.
Does anybody have an answer for Michael?
So as I understand it, we have to provide a warning for the meeting, and Nick, James, and Amy can jump in if I'm wrong. And it's under Rhode Island general laws, and it has to be 7 days before the meeting that you have to post the warrant.
we have in the past continued meetings. And that's been, and we've gone through I think we've gone I think we went as long as 4 nights in a row on these meetings. But but you had to meet when when it was called. And I don't imagine that's changed. I'm not sure how much of a plan gonna be able to come up with in that time. I think ultimately, I think this is a good thing because I think a lot of years we've had a lot of people who haven't been coming to financial town meeting and have sort of lost track. And hopefully this year we'll bring them back. And we'll get a broader understanding of such things. But as far as the question is, are these items that people think we don't, I'd like to get some kind of handle on, do people think we're never going to need a pumper, we're never going to need to redo dispatch, we're never going to have to be dredging in the harbor or work on the transfer station, because it's not going to go away. And there does have to be some plan. We can have a meeting later. We can have a meeting in the fall, but that would only, it's really, I feel like we're strategizing for next year at this point.
Well, except I think it bears discussion among the council and the community, the point that David raised, the point that Chris Blaine raised, the point that Michael Farrow raised, and that is, yeah, sorry.
I don't know, but
Light is on.
yeah. David and Chris and Mike raised, I think, something that's worthy of discussion, which is, it's the warrant is now before the financial town meeting, but the circumstances are pretty dramatically changed. Do we develop a consensus approach that gets presented? There's nothing that any of us can do to change the warrant, obviously. But it seems to me to make some sense now that I've gotten my emotion off my chest, at least chat about whether it makes sense to develop an approach. I hadn't heard until this meeting that there have been conversations with James and Nick about doing a referendum. I didn't know that.
That was only an hour ago, Keith, so don't feel bad.
Oh, it's not that I feel bad. It's just if there's a plan going on, I think, it would be good to air it.
So can I just ask so let's go with, we put forward the budget with the 4% and the debt service override that's been approved. What is the legislative process to change this in the future? So that Block Island Square Peg, is that something we work with Tina Spears and all of them, and then it's in place for next budget, approved to do it, and then these items go in? Would that be an alternate way to look at it?
It's a good question, because when my head's been exploding for a couple of days now, and one of the things that I did / we did is engage with Tina Spears, engage with our the lobbying firm that the town has on retainer, and I think there is at least some interest in exploring, as the session reaches its end, the idea that there probably should be a a New Shoreham specific provision in this act. I'm being really, really careful about how I say that because I know enough about the legislative process to know that it's like, it's full of unanticipated complications. And one day somebody says, yeah, we'd be interested in doing that. And the next day the person says, well, sorry, couldn't. But I think sort of zooming out a minute, I think this should be very much sort of top of list for us in terms of our conversations with the state government.
But before we get there, that's after financial town meeting.
Agreed.
Yeah,
But
at
going
the-
into financial town meetings, are we going to have a motion to put forth to strike these items from the budget?
So,
How are we going to handle this?
so
What has to happen at financial town meeting? At least based on the conversation Amy, James, Nick and I have had, as we try to work through this. Sure, there needs to be a vote and we would have to do it by the items in the budget. Because how we approve the budget is we go through each department and approve it. So we look at the first step, which would have a couple, as we come to the, like, if we come to, let's keep it easy.
Marion, could you pull your microphone closer?
Sure,
Like-
if we look at, for instance, let's go the community service one. So in the community service, we have the Block Island Health Service, 14,000, and we have the Block Island Volunteer Fire Department. So a motion would be made to reduce that budget by those two numbers added together, which is 53,005. At some point, there could be a motion to increase that budget, those budgets. But you would have to have an offset. What I would do step by step is do the reduction, so we're in alignment with the, what the state has approved. And then then go back and revisit these items. I mean, it's going to take time. I just don't think people would be ready if we approved like the first budget on here. And someone thinks they may want to reduce something in order to fund one of these items. I think we need to be somewhat flexible, but we also need to explain to folks what's going on. If I can offer the council some thoughts that we've gone through, Amy and I've gone through, and the attorneys, specifically, as we said with the pumper, is possibly looking for some funding mechanism on a long-term basis or short-term basis, a borrowing. That could be done either at a special financial town meeting or via a ballot at the November election. We'd have to go through that process and we'd have to have it lined up. Maybe the renovations of the dispatch, we would like to do the same thing. Or just delay for 1 year the renovations of the dispatch. The communications, I have no problem. I know we wanted to get it done this year. We can delay that for a year. The $60,000 in the shoreline access, that was a match of a grant. We did not receive that grant. Old Harbor Bulkhead, the 50,000. We'll wait a year, as we'll do with the transfer station. The dredging is already in the regular operating budget. That leaves us two particular items that I really would like to explore possibly funding and including in the budget. It's the Block Island Health Service and the Fire Department. We just found out also that we did not get the recreation grant for the pickleballs. There was a match of 15,000. That 15,000 would be a reduction in recreation and an increase to community service. Block Island Volunteer Fire Department, I have spoken with them. They've agreed to reduce that budget by 10,000, which is now 29,005. We have gotten our final health insurance cost. We see a savings. It's a small amount. It's $10,000. That brings us down with them to 29,000. I have some thoughts I haven't fully fleshed out. That would help us make out the 29,000 for the fire department. That gets us to where I think we want to be, and I understand the borrowing may not be what we prefer to do, but if we have these parameters in the state statute, and as Amy and I spoke, it's not the 4% is the problem. We're okay with the state statute with the 4%. It's the language that allows for the override. And I can tell you, based on our conversation with the Department of Revenue, there were other communities that brought forward, not similar, but some along the concept that we talked about. There was another community that brought forward some costs related to erosion that happened in their community. They were also denied. So I think it may be time this legislation, this tax cap was implemented, the language drawn up back in 2008 under, if anyone remembers, I'm sure Martha remembers, Senator Piper Weave, who was the Senate president at that time. So it's time, I think, to take a look at the language of this tax cap. So those are some suggestions.
That was revised. That may have been tighter than it was initially. I honestly, I just don't remember. But I know we had to do this in the 80s. It's in the town records. I looked it up. So, but it was changed over time. But I think if we do something like that, I think we have to have some kind of worksheet, some kind of something that people have to look at to know what's going on. It's, people, come in at 6:15 and wonder why they don't know what page they're on, and 7:15, I'm sorry. And we've just got to try to do everything we can to make sure people understand this. And if we decide to do something different, that it's in a really comprehensive plan that somebody like me doesn't put together, because I'm, nobody could follow what I write. Somebody else has to do it.
So, Mary Ann, you feel confident that you could put together a list of things that would get us a vote, say, in the fall on bonding for a pumper truck? I have to say, we got to do that dispatch stuff. And if the statute doesn't change, we could be in a state of perpetual delay on that.
Can we clarify, it's not a pumper truck,
I
is
know,
it?
you're
It's a
right.
pump.
No,
No, I
it's
think it's important because I've
Yeah.
had a couple people
Yes, thank you. You're right.
tell me this week that they don't think we need another pumper
Thank you,
truck
Mom.
because we
Yes.
have a pumper truck.
Yes,
It's a pump,
yes.
that it's a saltwater pump.
Mobile.
So I just want to clarify
Yes,
that because
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you.
So Mary Ann,
Let's finish.
Yeah.
So you're confident that we can put together a plan that achieves the priority items here within the 4%, but that contemplates either a referendum or a special financial town meeting to bond for the mobile pump and the dispatch renovation. Is that right? Is that what
Yes.
I'm hearing? I just want to,
And as Amy said, we have some other bond issues, some small ones that we could possibly tie these with.
so my question was going to be, if we were to do, why would it have to wait till the fall to do the meeting? I just, the last thing we need
Yeah.
is the town burning down and not
Yeah.
have,
that's a good point.
and
So the reason we would have to wait is we didn't put in a warning. The particular thing is for the pumper, the saltwater portable pumper. all the renovations.
I can't hear.
So we would have to go, we would have to go through the process of advertising the meeting to present it to the voters.
But that's like 60 days or
Amy.
instead of 6 months. So we could theoretically turn it around much more quickly.
Right.
than the fall.
If that's the consensus
Right.
of the council, we're
Good
just, brainstorming ideas. We
Yeah.
thought it'd be easy to put on the November ballot. Another thing Amy mentioned, and I haven't talked to the fire department about this at all, is that in the past, what they've done is the fire department have moved forward and ordered equipment with the understanding that the town will present it to the voters. And there's a risk for the fire department if the voters don't approve it. I don't think that'll be the case here, but that has been something that I guess the community has done in the past. So I offer that also.
And I want to get back into the night of financial town meeting. There can also be some scrambling because it hasn't happened lately, but there may be things cut from the budget from the floor that aren't on our sheets. And that's just something I have to keep in mind.
Thank you. Good. I mean, to your earlier point, I actually think, a worksheet of some sort would actually be really helpful. I agree. I agree with you, Martha.
Doug, Michelle.
Doug?
Michelle, there are a lot of issues to discuss, we'll talk too long, just shut me off.
You won't.
Comments, I agree with Amy, don't fight the state, you're wasting your time and money. The state put this rule in back in the 80s when many towns were having double-digit budget increases, and there's a reaction to that. Whether it can be amended or not, I don't know. As far as the state looking at the town, we probably have the lowest property tax rate in the state. They're like, you're not spending enough money. But, so they think we've got it made, but what they won't listen to, and I've argued with them for years, is that we are a volunteer town. We don't have trash pickup. We don't have a professional fire department. They don't take that into account of what the tax rate is. So our tax rate, if we hired everything that Providence does, Warwick, our tax rate would probably double or triple. Right. They don't get it. I agree with Martha on the sinking funds. It was nice when we had them, because we planned 3 to 5 years in advance and something to be paid without borrowing. I'm not aware, because it wasn't near that long ago. The first borrowing I know this town really took was the sewer plant. And after that, it's been borrow. And I'm concerned, I know Michael Farrell made the question last year at the financial town meeting, is how much borrowing this town is doing. You don't have a new fire department building before you. You don't have a school bond before
Right.
you. Amy has all the debt service in the warrant. It's very clear. What I don't know is how much comes off, next year, the year after, how much those payments are going to drop because the bond is mature. I don't know how much you're going to save from that. So there's.
Amy has a really good bar chart about that.
What's that?
Amy has a really good bar chart about that.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
No, she's.
Yeah. No. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. I was just saying you're right. That bar chart is helpful.
And, sometimes you gotta look at your sources of revenue. Like the town does a lot of user fees. And I had a short discussion with Mary Ann the other day about that $2 million dump in the capital budget next year. And we talked, I made a suggestion about how to pay for that on user fees and not affect the property taxes.
Yep.
So there's things like that. I don't know what the boat fee, I don't know what it is now, is it $1? That should be increased. Look at why we need to spend these monies. What's the requirement? Who will be servicing? If you get a user fee to pay for that, I think that's the fairest way to do things. Financial town meeting, I think that you have to come to a consensus of something to put out before the meeting, and I would suggest on the bulletin board, explaining your position. If you have some Mary Ann suggestions, well, we can put this off, That's one thing. I don't know if it's feasibly possible, drive Nick Crisplin's job very harder. If you come in to say the community thing and there's a $600,000 fire truck, I don't know if you can approve that but accept that for consideration later in the meeting. I don't know if that's possible or not. To make Chris's life very difficult. It might not be. But I think you have to decide, and if it comes down to the final thing that the townspeople approve more than the state will allow, then it comes down to you to decide what's going to be reduced so that you come under what you're allowed to tax for.
Thank you, Doug.
But I'm concerned about the debt. You get two big things coming on,
I know.
and they are necessary.
Yeah, I know.
You got somewhere to. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Michael?
I have some questions more than have any input or answers. If we open the meeting on Monday, we obviously can't postpone because of the regulation. But we go through on the opening comments that the state denied us 8.4%, and Marianne puts together a plan on how to meet those new state requirements, and then say we will continue the meeting a week from now, so that everyone can digest what's there. The public is not really informed of the state drawback.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to put yourself, I think, in a position where you're going to get 100 questions from everybody in the audience. They're here to vote. And I don't know if we can continue a meeting a week later. I don't know. But those are items to consider. And I think we also, to pick up Doug's point, is it would be good pass out at that meeting in addition to any recommendations that might be made for people to consider the debt and how it rolls off in the next 4 years.
That is it. Yeah, I agree.
Because, you know, we're talking about doing a lot of things here on bond issue, and if only 10 million rolls off in the next 4 years, we've already adding 2 or 3 million right away. It's crazy. It's crazy. I think the public has to really understand where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think the commercial tax has to be taken a look at, a hard look at.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been following that, but originally we were going to work throughout this year on fundamental reshaping of the property tax system. When it became clear that we had compelling needs, we decided to do to approach it as a 2-stage, which was to do homestead potentially, which we're hearing in a week or two, and then work over the next year on a less of a blunt instrument and more of a more sophisticated system. But yes, you're right. I agree.
We have the debt in the in here, don't we?
No, falls, is that, I forgot that bar
Yes.
chart was in.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
page
Mike-
49 of 94, if you're looking in the big packet.
In this packet,
Yes,
page 49. Amy, what was it?
49 of 94, the pages are numbered in the upper right-hand corner.
There's a bar chart of the debt.
And the short version of the story is just about 100% of the town's debt comes off in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Amy. I apologize for forgetting that bar chart. I knew I had seen it. I didn't realize it was in the document.
Procedurally, today, do we need a motion from the council not to exceed the 8.4%?
No.
No.
No, because it's that weird thing where nothing's before us. As Molly pointed out, the budget is before the financial town meeting. Unless I'm wrong about that, Amy or Marianne, please kick me under the table. But when Marianne and Amy and I talked about scheduling this, it was to have this kind of conversation and to start bringing people up to speed on the likely challenges that we're going to have to contend with on Monday at the financial town meeting. But I mean, as I said, I agree with Martha. I think it would make sense to say at the very least, here is a way. Because as I can't remember whether it was Michael or Doug, you know, it may be a slog anyway, but if we could you know, have some refined thinking going in. I know you're intending to do that anyway, but I think that would be very helpful. Lori?
Sorry, Nicole, I kind of liked your idea of taking on the scale, but probably not a great idea.
Even I liked it.
I know this isn't really a town thing, but for these items that relate to the pump and the emergency dispatch, is it possible to have some kind of fundraising this summer as people get off the boat and look at the surface tents in front of them where the harbor side used to be? It's front and center on everybody's mind. I don't know
So
who would do that, but it seems like for these very important things that we might be able to do something about it.
I don't disagree with you. I think part of the thing on the mobile pumper is to be able to order it with confidence. So that, you know, because and you know, the interesting thing about the pump that we learned is if you look at the pricing structure, there's like this built-in escalator. So the later you order it, the more expensive it is. You know, like it's so it's cheaper to buy it now than it's going to be in a year. Chris Hobie gave us a really good breakdown on that. Marianne, you recall that, right? For one of our budget meetings, but that's not an argument against fundraising. That was just sort of the part of the urgency. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I just don't, we'd have to talk to Chris and Kirk and Michael about how to put that kind of a fundraising effort together. But I mean, I think people would be more than willing to give. And, you know, to Doug's point earlier, we have an even bigger compelling need on the fire side, which is, you know, new building, which I also think we ought to try to raise money for. And we've already started.
Without going into the weeds on this, I think just very simply, it never crossed my mind before. There probably should be something we can talk to the property owner about getting some kind of sign there of why there's a big hole, because an awful lot of people have heard about it, but it was August, and people are going to say, "What happened here? Why is this here?" And just reprint, laminate the Katie Mulvaney's piece in the paper. It was in
Maybe we
Providence
could-
Journal. It was
Maybe
very
we could put it
compelling.
under a tent, you think, or?
No, I'm not. I'm trying not to go there.
I bit my tongue, Molly.
I am.
One of the many things I love about you is that you didn't.
Are we trying to
No, we should,
accomplish something? Are we trying to be?
But you have a big QR code on that that says, help us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Donate, and, you know, as people walk by.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, I think that you're right on with that, because like I just got an email from the library and they have a a QR code on there if you want to donate to the library. I do think that that's the way to go. And that would be the fire department having to do that, right? The town doesn't fundraise for the fire department, but that would be a good way for the fire department to fundraise and sort of like with what Martha. It's up to the individual property owner at that location, whether that he would think that was suitable, right? But like there are other locations in town.
Chris.
Chris Blaine, I hope that the council doesn't decide to open the financial town meeting and then postpone it for a week. I think that would be a big mistake. I think when people come to that meeting, they're prepared to vote. I don't think they'd want to say, well, let's go home. We'll come back a week from now. We don't know what we're facing. It sounds to me like our town manager, our finance director, needs to lead, take that 8.4%, navigate through the meeting. You've got a year to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And let's remember one thing, and I'm not trying to knock anyone or anything. The reason the Harborside burned is neglect. The state didn't do their job. The fire protection people didn't do their job. So let's say to the state, okay, look, you want to cut back this, you want to cut back that, you better make really good and sure that everything is inspected this year. Everything is 100%. Let's not overlook the grease in the grease hood. Let's not say, oh, it's okay. Let's make sure of everything. Make sure the mutual aid channels are still open. It worked like a charm. I'm not saying you should depend on it, but you have a year to plan for something. You have to tighten your belt, take a good look at it, and start going around the laws, follow them, and just say to people, look, we didn't expect this. Last minute, doing the best we can.
Yeah.
I think we're much better off that.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, my point was not jumping into the meeting immediately, was handing it papers out, being sure people understood, being sure people seen it, to try to get it out before Monday. But I don't think we should expect people to be, you got to give them a half an hour to read stuff. We used to. It's one night a year, for pity's sake.
Any other comments? So Mary Ann, you and Amy are working on that, right, Amy?
Probably half done.
Probably all done. Oh, I'm sorry, Doug. Thank you.
I'm gonna repeat myself, I'm sorry. I agree with Mr. Blaine here. He's correct, you can go to the meeting, you can vote. And I think if there's any problems, either before the meeting, you want to put something together and say, we accept this, we think this should be postponed. And have that available over the bulletin board or any other way you can, so people know before they get to the meeting what's going to go on. And since the tax rate will go down, it might be a little easier. But I think the fire department will do heavy fundraising once there is a building design, which is, being talked about. There's certainly nothing definite yet. There will be a lot of fundraising there. And the medical center did an awesome job what they fundraised, what they're building without town funds. So a lot will be done. And the other thing, if there's anybody who doesn't think the fire department needs a pumper, then they should be shown pictures of town in the middle of the night last year to see pictures of the dock, what it looked like.
Mm-hmm.
All the pumpers. Yeah. So
Yep.
I don't think that should be an issue.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Anything else before we adjourn? Did Pat Tangwall come in with a magnum opus that he wants to present to us? Good. Briefly. Briefly. Yeah.
If you adjourn, are you able to have a meeting again before Monday? Or can you recess and take the time to look at what Mary Ann and Amy put together before Monday and vote on it? I don't know.
We could talk about continuing this meeting.
Yes.
It's a good question.
Good.
I hadn't really thought about that.
Want to see it before it goes out, right?
No.
It's a 48-hour. That's what it is. Emergency. It's an emergency?
Can you use the microphone on?
I don't think we need to have a meeting. I think we've pretty much talked it through here. And we can't have a meeting under the laws now. Because weekends don't count as time. If we couldn't the earliest we could have a meeting if we advertised this afternoon would be, what, Tuesday?
Well, could we can just continue this meeting? You guys scratch something together and share it?
The last ruling that we had, and this I believe was from Nick and James, was that we did need to repost for 48 hours, even though it was continued to a date certain. Is that still your perspective?
It is, Millie, thank you. But it doesn't prevent the town from, I know there's been some talk of a worksheet or something like that, posting it publicly on your website so folks can read up on that information and get themselves up to speed.
So can I make a suggestion? If I can have maybe the first and second warden join Amy and I in putting something together and getting it out to amongst the four of us. And the three of you just trust that we do what we think we heard this afternoon.
It's about our only option.
Yeah.
I mean,
And Keith and I will not go wild about things earlier said.
Look, I had something that I had to get off my chest. It was very therapeutic.
But there wouldn't be a problem with you circulating that to us individually and getting feedback, right? Mary Ann? Oh, right.
Neil,
there's
with that,
nothing-
I'd be concerned about a rolling quorum with that, Neil.
Yeah.
But there's nothing, first of all, there's nothing binding because the budget is in front of the financial town meeting. But there's nothing that would prohibit that from going out to members of the council and to the community.
Correct.
So, you know, is a very interesting, just as an aside, I can't remember who I was talking to about this recently, but there's a very interesting bright line about at what point do we transition from members of the town council to voters at the financial town meeting for purposes of open meetings, but that we'll leave that aside for another day.
I mean, for this purpose, if there was somebody in the community who had suggestions, they could write those up as well.
Sure.
Because this budget has already transitioned away from us. I understand what David was saying about how the leadership is with us, but the budget is with the voters. So if somebody in the public, you know, if somebody sitting here was like, wait, I've got this great idea about how we could proceed with this, they could write that up as well.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't just lay with us, because it's technically, this budget has transitioned to you guys. So
As we've acknowledged that more than
yeah,
once.
but
That's
I
right.
guess you don't understand what I'm saying. Like, sure, you and Martha can make
Changing
suggestions.
the budget, we're saying, we're explaining what happened. And
Sure.
what's going on, because this hasn't happened in a lot of years. A lot of people aren't even, I mean, last time I remember this being even talked about very much, Ray Torrey was on the council. So it's been a while.
Right. I'm just saying,
But they're gonna make a proposal of how to take that 1,45,000, whatever it was, million, and allocate it as best they can.
I understand that. I'm saying anyone else out there who wants to do the same thing.
Oh,
should
right.
Consider
Of course.
doing that as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But for the meeting, when we walk in, right, this is the path. So it seems like what I would need is a cover sheet that says, sorry, the state, you know, exempted 8-something%. These are the items we're pulling out. and we will discuss them when we get to each section.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Dory. Sorry.
Do I have to repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay. So as a voter coming in, it seems like on top of this packet, this just needs to say, state did not approve the override, 8 point something % has to come out of the budget. These are the items that did not get approved, and we will review them section by section. Can't that be done?
No, because the item, it's up to the voters to remove the items. So it's,
These are the items that will need discussion when we get section to section.
No, we should tell people what happened.
I mean, you're
And
gonna-
these weren't approved.
Otherwise, like,
well, I think it could be written like the town manager recommends, or the finance director recommends that this be cut, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you may come into the meeting and have a different idea about what should be cut. Like, this is
that's
where it
fine.
gets
We'll
complicated.
discuss it section by section.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But it's upfront what's happening, like what the problem is, you know, needs like a little cover page.
I hear
Yeah,
you.
that's what we're
Yes,
talking, that's what
that's-
we're talking about.
I hear you, Dory.
You know, I'm sorry, I thought that's what I was talking about.
And
I,
then we think
in my
of recommendations, how to proceed with them, that can come later.
Or it'll come in the introduction to the budget.
because somebody can always
Which-
cut something out of some other budget that frees up a bunch of money. Not to further confuse things, but it's happened.
I guess I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's up to you, voters, to decide what gets cut. That's where the vote actually gets taken. We can recommend things all day long, but so can you.
Mary Ann and Millie, did you have something you wanted out there?
Can I just ask to that point? So if I go through and I say, well, I don't want to cut anything, let's vote on this. Doesn't this leave us in a huge problem, right? So explaining that problem up front is important to help you make your decision as you go through, you know?
Yeah. Go ahead, Barbara.
I think so.
Hi, Barbara McMullen. I had the same question. If we have a meeting on Monday and we present, here's what we think we need to do to get back to just the 4%, to get rid of the 8.4%. And people vote not to do that, and they vote to approve the full 8.4% because it's in here, then what would happen? Would there need to be a redo, or that's where I think that's the point Dory was making.
Okay,
People get to vote on what they want to vote, and it's all here, including the 8.4. So then what would happen?
I think we're skipping over the first point that this was the override that was submitted. These are the items that weren't approved for part of the override. If you want them, you got to take the money out of somewhere else. Because the state gives us a certain limit. But we're trying to keep it simple.
Right, so you finance director, town manager, whoever can say, these are the things we have to take out. But again, if people don't vote to take them out, you can't make them vote to take them out unless you change the budget. So what would you do in that regard? Maybe, someone else.
I think we keep going. Nick and James can weigh in, but I don't think the meeting ends until we have adopted a budget that is consistent with state law.
I agree.
So we just keep going.
When's the Kentucky Derby's this weekend, isn't it?
Terrific. Anything else? You have a motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. We're adjourned.
I actually